if you want to increase your paycheck or your compensation, you better stay in FAANG, right? They pay the most. You have 100% chance to have a fat paycheck. Versus in startups, you have like maybe 1% chance to have a really big exit, or maybe 0.01% to have really large exit, and all the rest probably you're going to fail, right? So if compensation is your first kind of priority, stay in FAANG. If work-life balance is your first priority, definitely stay in FAANG, right? Like you can work really easily there. You'll have the 9 to 5. Nobody betters you on weekends. Again, it depends based on teams, but usually that's the case. Versus in startups, you're probably going to work a lot, right? Especially if you're the founder. There is no 9 to 5 if you're a founder of a startup.
What was your, I guess, motivation for getting into startup world? Was it something in your background where your family that was entrepreneurial? Was there anything that specifically drew you in?
I was a mechanical engineer when I started. And being a mechanical engineer in New York City, there are unique opportunities there. I ended up going to Seattle and working for Boeing, and that was a great experience. I really enjoyed it, but I felt a bit like a commodity. And for me, getting into startups started right after that, where I wanted to get away. I wanted to be part of something that I felt like I was really able to affect change within an organization and have a big impact. So I ended up going to a company called Right Media, which was a later stage startup in New York. It was one of the earlier ones in 2007. So that was really the reason. And that experience was so good that it led me to always kind of search for one and go back to it.
Cool. Yeah. So your background, studying your profile, you've done a lot of startup work before you joined, moved into the FAANG world. Maybe talk us through that, and what was your incentive or why you wanted to take that switch from startup into FAANG.
Yeah, a lot of selfish reasons, and I'll say why in a second. But I have really strong opinions that you actually should not start your career in big companies. This is where you go to end your career. It's a great place to retire. Like every time that I get like young people who just start their career asking me like, where should they go? Should they go to whatever, Facebook and all those big corps, or should they go to startups? My recommendation is always go to startups, because this is where you'll have the chance to learn the most. You'll always also have the chance to fail the most, but like depends what your motivation. And I think the question is really what is your motivation to decide what you want to do next, right? So I started in startups because this is where I felt belonged at the beginning. But after starting a few companies, I realized that I don't have enough skill set to develop big companies, right? So I decided to join all those like Facebook and Amazon to see like how the best companies in the world really operate. In terms of processes, in terms of scale, in terms of like hiring people and pretty much everything in between. Because all you have, if you don't have this kind of perspective, all you know is whatever you learned in the startup, which is not a lot in terms of processes, right? Startups are notoriously known for not having process. And process comes with scale usually. So I felt that I always missed this point of like how you scale a company, how a big company operates, what is HR, right? Like what is performance review, like how those things actually like act. So I always knew that I want to go back to be a founder and go back to start a company, but I didn't feel that I have enough tools in my position to make those companies really big, above certain size, right? So I decided to take a break, join all those kind of big, well-known corporations to see how they run things. Anything from hiring to firing to performance reviews to managing other people, to email communication and everything that you can probably learn in corporations. And all my tenure there, I knew that I'm going to go back to startups. So I try to learn as much as possible and kind of read from their book so I can kind of implement it in my book later on. I guess it depends what your motivation. If your motivation is just paycheck, you should probably stay in all those big corporations. If your motivation is whatever impact or on your own destiny, you should probably think about startups.
Yeah, actually, I was going to say that like people ask me for advice, and it does depend. I give usually the same advice of going to a startup, but I think there are some people who, if you just want like a nice stable job and whatever, like sort of schedule, then maybe startups aren't for you. And, you have to be comfortable with constant change and just a lot of the stuff that comes with being a startup. But at the same time, you do get exposed to so much. And I think that a lot of people starting out in their career don't realize, like, going to a startup, the breadth of like things that you get to interact with and how helpful that can be in you figuring out what you want to do over the long haul. Get exposed to so much. Whereas if you go to a large company, you usually have a much more narrow view of the world in terms of what your job is day in and day out.
Yeah, motivation plays a huge role on what you want to accomplish, right? If you want to increase your paycheck or your compensation, you better stay in FAANG, right? They pay the most. You have 100% chance to have a fat paycheck. Versus in startups, you have like maybe 1% chance to have a really big exit, or maybe 0.01% to have really large exit, and all the rest probably you're going to fail, right? So if compensation is your first kind of priority, stay in FAANG. If work-life balance is your first priority, definitely stay in FAANG, right? Like you can work really easily there. You'll have the 9 to 5. Nobody betters you on weekends. Again, it depends based on teams, but usually that's the case. Versus in startups, you're probably going to work a lot, right? Especially if you're the founder. There is no 9 to 5 if you're a founder of a startup. So ask yourself really, what is your motivation? Is it just an ego trip? Do you want to just like control other people? Well, you can do it in FAANG, you can do it in startups. It doesn't really matter. So look, what is the real motivation? Are you super passionate about some field, right? And you can find a job there. So maybe startups is your place, right? Start a company around that. Do you like leading and managing other people? You can do it in FAANG, you can do it in startups. So I guess I would start by asking what are you optimizing for, and go from there.
Yeah, I remember when I was leaving Google, I was talking to a few people, and I was thinking about going to a startup and joining one. And so one of the people I spoke with was an engineering manager at Google. And he basically said, unless you start your own startup, there is just no monetary reason that you would ever, leave Google to go to another startup. And running the numbers, it is absolutely true. So 100% agree with you. It's kind of like you have to be a little bit crazy to go and start a startup or to join a startup, but there are really good reasons, like the work environment, the ability to learn tons of stuff and take on lots of hats and responsibilities. Those can kind of serve you later to know, what it's like to actually run a company end to end, a lot more than you would ever get working at a big company where you're kind of just focused on one task over and over. So what I really like about startups is actually that core ability, right? Like my job is never the same throughout like the life of a startup. It stays the same for like 2-month increments, and then I have to find someone who's better than me at that task, hire them, and have them do that task. And that's kind of like the mark of a successful startup if you can do that.